Professional test drivers are not easy to impress. These are people who have strapped into pre-production prototypes at 3 in the morning on closed tracks, who have pushed experimental machinery to its absolute limits before the lawyers found out, and who have driven more horsepower than most enthusiasts will ever see in a lifetime. They are, by definition, unshockable, or at least that is what they believe. These 12 machines disagreed. Some were too fast, some were too violent, some came from brands that had absolutely no business building something that dangerous. Every single one of them left professional testers questioning everything they thought they knew. Number 12. The 1970 Buick GSX Stage 1. Let's be honest about something. When you hear the word Buick, you do not think terror. You think your grandfather's driveway. You think comfortable seats and a smooth ride, and maybe a hard candy in the cup holder. Buick had spent decades building a reputation for dignified, unhurried transportation, and that reputation was about to get absolutely destroyed. In 1970, Buick released the GSX Stage 1, and professional automotive journalists who sat down to test it made a mistake that cost them their composure. They underestimated it, every single one of them. Under that sculpted hood sat a 455 cubic inch V8, producing an official 360 horsepower. But the number that mattered, the number that rewrote the story, was the torque figure, 510 pound-feet. That was not a misprint. 510 pound-feet of torque made the GSX Stage 1 the highest torque production muscle car of 1970. More than the Hemi, more than the LS6 Chevelle, more than anything Pontiac or Dodge had on the showroom floor. Car and driver tested it and came back stunned. Quarter mile in the low 13-second range. Trap speeds around 106 miles per hour. They called it the fastest car they had tested all year. A Buick. The fastest car they had tested all year. What shocked testers was not just the speed, it was the delivery. That torque arrived low in the rev range and it did not ask permission. Plant your foot and the GSX would squat, load up, and launch with a violence that felt completely out of character for a car wearing a Buick badge. The rear end would step out before you had time to react. And because it looked so composed, so almost respectable sitting there in Apollo white with its bold black stripes, nobody was prepared. Buick only sold 678 GSX models in 1970. Fewer than 400 were Stage 1 cars. The automotive establishment never quite recovered from the embarrassment of being surprised by a luxury brand. Neither did the competition. Number 11. The 1989 Chevrolet Camaro IROC-Z with the 5.7-liter V8. The IROC-Z had a marketing problem that worked against it with serious testers. It was too famous as a poster car. It was the vehicle of choice for bedroom walls and airbrushed murals on the sides of vans. And that aesthetic reputation made professional drivers quietly skeptical before they ever turned the key. Then they drove it, and the conversation changed. The 5.7-liter V8 pushed out 240 horsepower and 345 pound-feet of torque. 0 to 60 arrived in just over 6 seconds. Quarter mile in the low 15s. Those numbers were genuinely quick for 1989, but the real revelation was the chassis. Chevrolet had dialed in the suspension with a level of competence that shocked testers who were expecting something that looked fast and went fast in a straight line and did nothing else particularly well. The IROC-Z could corner, not just survive corners, actually corner, with limited body roll and grip levels that had no right to exist on a car this accessible and this affordable. Of course, it had its moments. The solid rear axle was always lurking, waiting for a mid-corner bump or an impatient throttle input to remind you that this was still a 1989 American muscle car with all the loyalty and predictability of a honey badger. When the rear end let go, it let go fast. Testers who pushed past the limit found themselves in unplanned drifts that required quick hands and quicker thinking. But what stayed with professional drivers was not the moments it bit them, it was the moments it didn't. For a car that the automotive world had quietly written off as a styling exercise, the IROC-Z had actual, genuine, surprising driving dynamics. The poster car could drive. Nobody saw that coming. Number 10. The 1991 GMC Syclone. There is a version of this story where someone at GMC stands up in a boardroom meeting and says, "What if we took a compact pickup truck and made it faster than a Ferrari?" And everyone in the room nods thoughtfully. That version of events seems completely insane. And yet, here we are. The 1991 GMC Syclone should not exist. It was a compact truck with a bed too small for serious work and no real towing credentials to speak of. What it had instead was a 4.3-liter turbocharged V6 producing 280 horsepower and 350 pound-feet of torque, fed through an all-wheel drive system that could actually put the power down without drama. 0 to 60 in 4.3 seconds. Read that again and take a moment. 4.3 seconds. In 1991, in a pickup truck with GMC on the tailgate, professional testers strapped in expecting something interesting and emerged from the experience visibly unsettled. Quarter-mile times in the low 13s put the Syclone in the same conversation as genuine sports cars from manufacturers who had spent their entire existence chasing that number. Instead, here was a blacked-out truck with red accents sitting at a traffic light, and it was faster than your Corvette. Your Corvette that you paid considerably more for. Sorry about that. The all-wheel drive system was the key. Where rear-wheel drive muscle cars of the era were still negotiating with physics at every launch, the Syclone simply gripped and went. The exhaust note was almost polite, which made the whole experience even more surreal. GMC only built 2,998 of them. Every single one built in black. Every single one capable of making professional automotive journalists question their entire careers. Number 9. The 1969 Chevrolet Camaro ZL1. Only 69 were ever built. Chevrolet barely acknowledged they existed. The price tag of over $7,500 in 1969 was more than 2 Corvettes, which meant the people who bought them were not casual enthusiasts. They were serious, purposeful individuals who knew exactly what they were purchasing. What they were purchasing was a factory race car with license plates, and professional testers who managed to get their hands on one came back from the experience speaking quietly and choosing their words very carefully. The ZL1 carried an all-aluminum 427 cubic inch big block V8 rated at 430 horsepower. Everyone who knew engines understood that rating was fiction, designed to keep insurance companies from having a complete collapse. The real number was somewhere north of 550 horses, and the aluminum block saved nearly 100 pounds off the nose compared to the iron block version, giving the ZL1 weight distribution that made the car feel genuinely alive in ways no standard Camaro had ever managed. Quarter-mile times hovered around the mid-12-second range right off the showroom floor. With minor tuning, they dipped into the 11s. The National Hot Rod Association looked at the performance figures and immediately moved it into a higher class, which was their polite way of saying, this thing does not belong with normal cars. Test drivers who pushed the ZL1 described an experience that was less like driving and more like negotiating. The engine made power with a violence that demanded respect at every moment. There was no casual relationship with a ZL1. You were either completely focused or you were having a very bad afternoon. The car had no interest in meeting you halfway. Number 8. The 1987 Buick GNX. 2 Buicks on this list. I understand that seems statistically improbable. Please bear with me. Buick handed the Grand National over to McLaren Performance Technologies and ASC and told them to build something that would make people forget the word Buick entirely. What came back was the GNX, and it accomplished that mission so thoroughly that professional testers sat in the driver's seat, looked at the badge on the steering wheel, and genuinely had to remind themselves where they were. The turbocharged and intercooled 3.8-liter V6 officially made 276 horsepower and 360 pound-feet of torque. Officially. Independent testing showed the GNX was making closer to 300 horses at the crank, and the torque was even more understated than that. This was a car deliberately sandbagging its own performance figures, which in 1987 was an approach that would have seemed absolutely deranged if the results had not been so spectacular. 0 to 60 in 4.7 seconds. Quarter mile in 13.4 seconds at 104 miles per hour. That put it ahead of a Ford Mustang GT, ahead of a Chevrolet Corvette, ahead of a Ferrari Testarossa, a Buick, running down a Ferrari Testarossa. What stopped test drivers cold was the turbo's power delivery. There was a pause, almost polite, and then the boost arrived like someone had thrown a switch. And suddenly the rear tires were working very hard, and the steering wheel needed your complete and undivided attention. The chassis was never designed for this, and the brakes were adequate at best for the speeds the GNX could reach. Only 547 were ever built, each one a monument to the absolute absurdity of what American engineers could accomplish when nobody told them to be reasonable. Number 7. The 1970 Chevrolet Chevelle SS LS6. Motor Trend tested an LS6 Chevelle in 1970 and recorded a quarter-mile time of 13.12 seconds at 107 miles per hour. That sentence right there is why this car is on this list. Those numbers from a midsize family car in 1970 represented something that the automotive establishment genuinely had not prepared itself for. The LS6 carried a 454 cubic inch V8 rated at 450 horsepower and 500 pound-feet of torque, the highest factory horsepower rating of the muscle car era. And unlike a lot of factory ratings from that period, which tended toward creative interpretation, the LS6 actually delivered. The engine featured forged steel internals, an aggressive camshaft profile, cylinder heads that flowed massive amounts of air, and a compression ratio of 11.25 to 1 that required premium fuel and would not accept any substitutions. Professional testers described the experience as controlled chaos. The rear suspension would squat under hard acceleration, loading the rear tires until they surrendered and became smoke. The front end would lift, making the steering light and vague precisely when you needed the maximum precision. And then the car would simply accelerate past any reasonable concept of what a Chevelle should be doing with its afternoon. What haunted testers was not just the speed, it was how accessible that speed was. The LS6 looked like any other Chevelle on the road. There was nothing about its appearance that warned you what was hiding under the hood. Chevrolet only built around 4,000 LS6 Chevelles in 1970, before canceling the engine due to tightening emissions regulations. Every one of them was a loaded weapon wearing a family car's clothing. Number 6. The 1989 Pontiac Turbo Trans Am 20th Anniversary Edition. Pontiac chose this car to pace the Indianapolis 500 in 1989, which, if you know what was under the hood, is either incredibly fitting or mildly irresponsible, possibly both. Here's the thing about the 20th Anniversary Turbo Trans Am that professional testers kept tripping over. It used a Buick V6, a turbocharged, intercooled, sequential fuel-injected Buick 232 cubic inch V6. This is a Pontiac Trans Am, the flagship American performance car, running a V6, and testers showed up to the test, expecting to be politely bored. The official rating was 250 horsepower at 4,400 revolutions per minute and 340 pound-feet of torque. Real-world testing suggested the actual number was closer to 300 horsepower. The car hit 0 to 60 in 4.6 seconds and ran the quarter mile in 13.4 seconds at 101 miles per hour. In 1989, that made it the fastest production car sold in the United States. Not one of the fastest. The fastest. And it weighed approximately 100 pounds less than a V8 Trans Am because the turbocharged V6 was lighter, which meant it also handled better than anything Pontiac had previously built. With no speed limiter fitted, the Turbo Trans Am would push all the way to 153 miles per hour. Professional drivers who ran it flat out described a car that kept composure at speeds that would have turned lesser machines into airborne suggestions. Only 1,555 were ever built. 40 were hardtops. 3 were convertibles. 3. If you own one of those convertibles, I hope you understand what you have. Number 5. The 2000 Ford Mustang SVT Cobra R. Ford built this car as an apology, which is an extraordinary origin story for something this violent. After the horsepower scandal of the 1999 Cobra, where Ford claimed 320 horsepower and independent dynos, found something considerably less enthusiastic. Ford's special vehicle team went away and came back with this. 300 were built, all of them in performance red. None of them with rear seats, none of them with air conditioning. This was not a car you bought for comfort. This was a car you bought because you wanted Ford to be forgiven and you were willing to suffer for it. The 5.4-liter dual overhead cam V8 produced 385 horsepower and 385 pound-feet of torque, 0 to 60 in 4.4 seconds, quarter mile in the low 13s at nearly 110 miles per hour. Top speed stretched past 170. But what stopped professional testers mid-sentence was the chassis. Bilstein shocks, Eibach springs, Brembo brakes with 13-inch rotors, 18-inch BBS wheels wrapped in Goodyear racing rubber, a front splitter, side skirts, and a rear wing generating actual measurable downforce. This was a Mustang that could lap road courses faster than cars costing twice as much. Road courses, with corners, a Mustang. Testers who had spent careers watching Mustangs understeer confidently into barriers found themselves genuinely confused by a car that turned in, gripped and rotated with something approaching European sports car precision. Ford sold each Cobra R for $54,000 and made buyers sign agreements promising not to immediately flip them. Today, clean examples command well over $100,000. The apology was accepted. Number 4. The 1969 Dodge Charger Daytona Hemi. Buddy Baker became the first driver in NASCAR history to crack 200 miles per hour during a test run at Talladega in a Daytona in 1970. 200 miles per hour. In a car that Dodge had to build 503 street versions of just to qualify for racing. Which means somewhere out there in 1969, a person drove one of these home from a dealership and parked it in a normal suburban garage next to a lawnmower. The nose cone extended nearly 2 feet beyond the standard Charger's front end. The rear wing stood almost 2 feet above the trunk lid and was made deliberately tall so the trunk could still open, which is the kind of practical engineering detail that makes you love and fear Dodge simultaneously. The Hemi version produced 425 horsepower, but race-prepped versions pushed well beyond 500. And the aerodynamic advantage over every other car on the track was so overwhelming that NASCAR banned the Winged Warriors by restricting engine sizes for aerodynamically modified cars after 1970. Professional testers who drove the street version discovered something genuinely unexpected. Above 150 miles per hour, the Daytona did not get nervous. It got more stable. The aerodynamics that made it look absolutely ridiculous in a parking lot were doing exactly what they were designed to do at speed. The car became planted and confident at velocities where other machines of the era became terrifying guessing games, which was remarkable, and also meant that the real danger of the Daytona was that it made triple-digit speeds feel manageable, which encouraged you to find out what happened next. What happened next was very fast and not always planned. Number 3. The 1970 Plymouth Hemi Cuda. 652 Hemi Cudas were built in 1970. Professional testers who got hold of one discovered that Plymouth had created something that sat in a category entirely by itself, a category that could be labeled cars that will kill you if you are not completely serious right now. The 426 cubic inch Hemi V8 was rated at 425 horsepower. Real output was closer to 500. The engine was not designed for street use in any genuine philosophical sense. It was a race motor that had been issued a birth certificate and a set of turn signals, dual 4-barrel carburetors that needed constant tuning, mechanical lifters that required regular valve adjustments, a cooling system that ran hot in traffic and made its feelings about stop and go driving very clear. What destroyed professional testers was the chassis dynamic underneath all that power. The Barracuda platform had a wheelbase of 108 inches, short. Combine a short wheelbase with more than 60% of the car's weight on the front axle and 500 horsepower trying to exit through the rear tires. And you had weight transfer that was not gradual or predictable. It was sudden. It was binary. The transition from grip to slide had no middle chapter. Quarter-mile times in the low 13s at over 105 miles per hour. But the number that haunted testers was not the time. It was how quickly the experience could go from absolute control to absolute chaos, with a throttle input that crossed an invisible line somewhere in the middle of a corner. The Hemi Cuda did not warn you. It simply changed the subject. Number 2. The 1992 Dodge Viper RT10. There was no roof, there were no windows. There was no traction control, no anti-lock brakes, no stability management, no airbags, and no apologies. There was a 400 horsepower 8-liter V10 that shared engineering DNA with a truck engine, connected to a 6-speed manual transmission, connected to rear tires that were doing their absolute best under difficult circumstances. The Viper was not the fastest car professional testers had ever driven. What made it historic was that it was the first car in living memory that made genuinely experienced, professionally trained, seen-everything automotive journalists lean back after the test and use the word scared. Not challenged, not demanding, scared. 0 to 60 in 4.6 seconds, quarter mile in the high 12s. Top speed past 160 miles per hour, limited only by aerodynamics and an individual's personal relationship with their own mortality. The side exit exhaust pipes could brand your leg climbing out if you were not paying careful attention, which was the Viper's way of telling you to stay alert at all times. There was no electronic buffer between the driver and the physics. Every surface texture communicated directly through the steering wheel. Every throttle input had an immediate and unmediated consequence. The independent rear suspension was sophisticated for the era, but could kick sideways over mid-corner bumps without broadcasting its intentions. And because there were no electronic aids to catch you, when the Viper let go, the outcome depended entirely on what you did in the next half-second. Dodge built just under 1,500 Vipers for 1992 and 93 combined, all of them roadsters, nearly all in Viper red. Professional testers who drove one and walked away with nothing broken considered that a success worth documenting. The Viper proved that an American manufacturer could build a supercar that matched European exotics for speed and exceeded them for pure, unfiltered, slightly dangerous drama. Number 1. The 1974 Pontiac Firebird Trans Am Super Duty 455. By 1974, the muscle car era was supposed to be finished. The energy crisis had arrived. Emissions regulations were strangling every performance engine in Detroit. Insurance companies had successfully priced young enthusiasts out of anything remotely powerful. Car magazines were publishing melancholy retrospectives about the golden age of horsepower, as though it were a recently deceased relative. Everything pointed toward an automotive future of small, quiet, responsible transportation. And then, Pontiac handed professional testers the keys to the Super Duty 455 and watched what happened. The engine officially made 290 horsepower under the new SAE net rating system, which measured output with all accessories attached and exhaust restrictions in place. The reality was considerably more violent. The Super Duty 455 was a genuine race engine that Pontiac had somehow convinced the EPA to allow them to sell to the public. Forged pistons, high-lift camshaft, special cylinder heads with larger valves and improved porting, high-rise aluminum intake manifold. The whole thing had the attitude of an engine that had read the emissions regulations and decided they were more of a suggestion. What made the professional testing experience historic was the context. Testers arrived in 1974, expecting to review something compromised, something neutered, something that wore performance styling as a costume over a fundamentally apologetic mechanical reality. That was what 1974 meant. That was the deal. Instead, they found a car that hit 0 to 60 in under 6 seconds and ran the quarter mile in the mid-13s. In 1974, during the malaise era, testers described an experience that felt almost transgressive, like discovering something that should not exist, but did, and was unapologetic about it. The massive torquey curve meant power was available everywhere in the rev range, and the Trans Am's rear suspension was never quite equipped to manage it gracefully. Get on the throttle mid-corner, and the rear end would rotate with a suddenness that only experienced drivers could catch. The solid lifter camshaft demanded valve adjustments every few thousand miles, and the Rochester quadrajet carburetor required the kind of attentive relationship that modern fuel injection has made completely extinct. Only around 1,000 were built. Each one was Pontiac's declaration that performance was not dead. It was simply underground, wearing a disguise, waiting for the regulations to stop looking. Professional testers who drove the Super Duty 455 in 1974 wrote about it with something that read less like automotive journalism and more like relief. Here, in the darkest period American muscle had ever known, was proof that the engineers had not given up. They had just gotten quieter about it. These 12 machines did not just go fast. They went fast in ways that nobody expected, from brands nobody suspected, in eras when nobody believed it was still possible. Professional test drivers are trained to stay calm, to evaluate analytically, to keep their emotions out of the cockpit. These cars made that impossible. They reached through the steering wheel and the seat and the throttle pedal and reminded even the most experienced, most seasoned, most seen-it-all testers that some machines refuse to be processed calmly. They demand a reaction, and they always get one. Which one of these would shake you? Drop your answer in the comments, and if you love the stories behind the machines that rewrote the rules, hit subscribe. We are just getting started.